Hey everyone, it's just Juice, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the Super Mario Galaxy movie. Yes, it did take me a little bit, but I have finally seen this film in theaters, and I've had a little bit of time to sort of digest it, really think through it a little bit, get my thoughts sorted, and so today I wanted to just share my opinion a little bit. Of course, if you know me or if you watch any of my content on this channel, you are going to be aware that I am a huge Nintendo fan, and Mario as a franchise or as a series of games is definitely not any exception to that. I have a deep love and appreciation for all of the Mario games. And when the movie did come out for the first time a couple years ago, I did really enjoy it. I thought it was, such a fun time. And as somebody who grew up playing Mario Galaxy, when it was announced that Mario Galaxy was going to be the follow-up to that original film, I was, of course, really excited to see what direction they were going to go with this film franchise, what that movie would look like. And now, all this time later, we have finally seen the release of the movie, and I now know the answer to that question. The movie was fun. I don't think that it's going to be winning any Oscars or anything like that, but if that is what you were expecting going into something like the Mario movie, or the Super Mario Galaxy movie rather, then I'm afraid that you're probably bound to be a little disappointed. That's, I think, why there were so many harsh reactions among critics. I mean, it's pretty obvious at this point that, animated movies can be equally as powerful, if not at times more powerful and better made than real sort of like live action films with real actors. But when it comes to adapting something like Mario into a film franchise, I don't think it's really fair to have that same level of expectations that you would go into something like a Disney movie or something like that. So yeah, when you hear all of these very harsh critic reviews saying that the story is, it's just like a breakneck speed, there's no semblance of a story here, I think that a lot of those comments are hyperbolic in nature. The movie doesn't have a super strong story or anything like that, but as a fun sort of animated kids movie, I think it serves its purpose pretty well. So yeah, in my opinion, while the movie definitely does have its flaws and has some things that it can improve on in future installments, I don't think that the super harsh reactions that came from critics saying that the movie was absolutely, terrible and everything like that, that seems a little bit excessive. Anyways, let's talk a little bit more specifically about my thoughts on the film. So the first thing that I want to talk about are the characters. There were a lot of great new characters that were introduced in this film, some from the Mario franchise, and even some characters from outside the Mario franchise that, had a pretty big impact on my opinion of this movie. The first and perhaps most significant new character that was introduced in this film was Yoshi. Yoshi was teased at the very end of the last Mario movie, so of course it makes sense for us to see him play a significant role in this film. And yeah, he shows up almost immediately right off the bat, and he basically stays as one of the main cast members for the film for its entire duration. And as someone who is pretty clearly a big Yoshi fan, I thought that he was integrated in this movie exceptionally well. Donald Glover was, of course, surprisingly cast as Yoshi. However, he does an exceptionally good job. Glover's voice work is very similar to how Yoshi sounds in the game, and honestly, the scenes that Yoshi is in, Yoshi is just so cute. It's exactly what I wanted from him in this movie. But it's great because he's not just cute, he's also, helpful in the film as well. He's helpful to the main cast. His ability to eat enemies and then turn them into eggs is actually very useful and utilized often throughout the film. The second most significant character that I think was added was Rosalina. Rosalina is also one of my favorite characters from the franchise. I think that she has an excellent design. She's of course attached to some of the best Mario games to ever exist, being the Galaxy games. And in particular, her being a princess that has connections to space, I think is super interesting. It sets her apart from the rest of the cast. So I was naturally very excited to see her in this movie as well, and just like Yoshi, I do think that she is very well integrated into this film. Brie Larson does an excellent job of bringing Rosalina to life. I love her personality. My only real complaint, I guess, about Rosalina's role in this film is that it ended up actually being quite a bit smaller than I was initially expecting going into the film. Now, the next character that I want to talk about is something of a slight spoiler if you have been trying to avoid spoilers entirely for this movie. If you're trying to avoid spoilers entirely for this movie, fast forward the video by about a minute or so that way you don't need to worry about getting spoiled, but I'm talking about Fox McCloud and his inclusion in this movie. Because yeah, no, they reveal that Fox was in this film something like 3 days or like something like that, like a very short period of time before the film was actually released. Which is such a crazy move to me because I think that this would have been honestly really exciting if they had just kept it hidden, kept it as a surprise. Especially because even though I knew that Fox was going to be in this movie, I was surprised at how much he was actually in it. Fox sticks around, he's one of the main characters. I think he might actually have more screen time than Rosalina, which is insane. But yeah, no, Fox, he looks great, he has, you know, tons of like super funny, humorous scenes, but he also, they do play him pretty straight as like this cool sort of like space explorer mercenary guy. And I do think that Glen Powell, as well as the, you know, animation team bringing him to life, they did an excellent job, and like it really did feel as if that he was Star Fox, and he was honestly the performance that impressed me the most in this film. It does really make me cross my fingers that we do get that Glen Powell pitched Star Fox movie at some point in the future. And of course there was also the new sort of main villain that was introduced for this film, and that is Bowser Jr. Bowser Jr. I do think is such a fun villain. First of all, seeing his abilities in this movie where, you know, he's like using his paintbrush, bringing monsters to life, and it leads to some amazing action sequences. I think things that are way better than what we got even in the first film. And his relationship with Bowser actually ends up being one of the focal points, I think, of this movie, and one of the things that really is, I think, like one of the more interesting parts of this film. So yeah, that's really what I want to talk about in terms of the new characters that were added to the movie. Still keeping things sort of brief and non-spoiler focused, I want to talk a little bit about the sort of like the visuals and the animation style for the movie. Of course, just like the first one, I think that, you know, it's great. They Illumination Studios nailed the aesthetics of the Mario universe, and they brought the characters to life generally in a very, I think, accurate way. Getting to see a lot of these locations, especially the ones that are from Mario Galaxy, brought to life in this movie, really expanded upon. I think it is, you know, amazing. It's so cool to be able to see these locations brought to life on the big screen. And something else that I thought was really interesting and that I liked a lot more about this movie, I think, in comparison to the last one, was that they were, I think, a lot more willing to sort of show that this movie comes from a video game franchise. And by that, what I mean is that they use at times a lot of like animations that are directly from the games. Like they use the sprites from like Mario Maker and like the SNES, like Super Mario World-esque sprites for these characters, and they actually use those in some like scenes in the movie. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the sort of story plot of the movie. Again, I'm going to start with trying to keep things as spoiler-free as possible. And then later on in the video, I will, you know, reach a point where we are going to start talking about spoilers. I'll, of course, give everybody a spoiler warning, just in case that you haven't seen this movie yet and are even later getting it to it than me, in which case, you know, you really got some catching up to do. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. So let's just jump right into things and talk a little bit about, yeah, my thoughts on the film's story. So, I kind of alluded to this earlier on in this video, but I do think that the story for the movie is just okay. I wouldn't describe it as being, you know, amazing or anything. One thing that I do find interesting about this film, and that is a little bit different than the last one, is that there isn't really one set focused story through a lot of the film's duration. In particular, during the first half of the film, a lot of the characters are kind of going through their own separate little journeys, and there is really like a multitude of different storylines going on instead of just one central focus for the film story. And this is something that I actually kind of think that I appreciate a little bit more in comparison to the first one. One thing that sort of bugged me a little bit about the first movie was that it felt like a lot of the characters were just background characters, and they didn't have a specific purpose or sort of story arc to be fulfilled within the film. In particular, I was disappointed by what the last film ended up doing with Luigi for much of the duration of the movie, because in a slight sort of twist of what we expect from the Mario Bros. Formula, it ended up being like Luigi that was captured by Bowser instead of Peach, and so Luigi was pretty absent from the first Mario film. Thankfully, with this, multi-character perspective, we do get the inclusion of like Luigi alongside Mario, and we get to see the two of them a lot more together for, their portion of the story, which is something that I personally am very thankful for. So yeah, no, what we see during the first part, Mario and Luigi are sort of off on their own adventures. Peach sort of gets separated from the group and she goes to do like her own thing along with Toad. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of stuff going on like with Bowser in this movie, and Bowser ended up is kind of evolving as a character in ways that I didn't expect when they were showing off like the trailers and stuff for this movie. Of course, a lot of his role in this film is, just exploring his relationship with his son, Bowser Jr., and honestly, there was, a lot of great, wholesome moments and, funny moments from those two being together, so that was honestly one of my favorite parts of the movie, was exploring the dynamic between the two of them a little bit more. And yeah, of course, as expected, these stories do eventually kind of come together, and not in any way that I think is really significant or interesting, but it does allow all of the characters to be together for the final sort of conclusion of the film, which does unfold in, a pretty fun and epic series of action sequences. So yeah, I don't want to go really, I guess, too in-depth into what any of the sort of storylines actually, individually look like, because that is, I guess, going a little bit into spoiler territory. But I do overall agree, I guess, with like a sentiment that comes from the critics' opinions that the movie it is very fast-paced. And because it is so fast-paced, we don't get a lot of time to spend at each individual location and, spend a lot of time focusing on individual story beats. It's kind of like we have a scene play out, so that way we can basically have an excuse to go on to the next scene, get to the next set piece, and then this formula kind of repeats continuously for about like an hour and 40 minutes. So yeah, no, a lot of these story moments, they don't have, a lot of depth or anything like that, but that wasn't something that I was personally expecting going into this movie, so in that sense, I wasn't, unsatisfied or anything like that. What did definitely satisfy me was what I was really expecting and hoping for from this movie, was for it to feel and seem like a Mario game. You get to see a lot of different locations and characters from across the Mario mythos, which does help to make the movie a lot more enjoyable. So if you are a Mario fan, one, you have probably already seen this movie, but two, I think you are bound to like this movie infinitely more than if you are not a Mario fan, because so much of really the enjoyment from this movie comes from being able to, take a look at what's going on the screen and be like, hey, look, I recognize that thing, I understand that reference. So yeah, in that sense, just like the first movie, I think that this film is really satisfying. The one thing I think in that sense that didn't quite super satisfy me in the movie was how much stuff they included from Mario Galaxy. There are a lot of like characters and enemies from Mario Galaxy that appear in this film, but I do wish that they sort of replicated more scenes in terms of like the set pieces and like cinematics and boss fights from Mario Galaxy, because I mean, man, there are so many epic cinematic moments that exist in that game that I think could have made for really great scenes in this movie if they had just spent a little bit more time going to these individual galaxies and doing all of that sort of stuff. But that wasn't really, I think, the focus what they were going for in this film. Instead, they just wanted to make a movie that would be appealing to Mario fans more generally, and as such, we get a bit more variety in terms of, what Mario characters, enemies are actually shown off in this movie. It's not just about stuff from Mario Galaxy. And honestly, in that sense, I wish that we maybe had the opportunity to explore some different sort of plot lines and games to use as like references for the sequel. And I think in that sense, it might have been better to actually have avoided covering Galaxy immediately after the first movie. Like, they could have just opted to call this movie Super Mario World, and we could have had a bit more of a focus on exploring stuff from, the regular sort of Earth world of the Mario mythos, instead of trying to opt for the Galaxy stuff and then ultimately not focusing on stuff from Galaxy. and instead going for a lot more wide of a pool of inspirations. Like, even the function of a character like Rosalina and what her character sort of, serves as in the movie, that could have easily been replaced for a non-Mario Galaxy character, like a princess like Daisy, for example, could have been the feature of this movie instead of Rosalina, and trying to go for that Galaxy theme. I think that there would have been just a lot of ways that they could have made this movie work without using the Galaxy stuff and saving that to explore in a future film. So that way they could take advantage of it, actually being about Mario Galaxy a little bit more. I feel like I've talked at this point about, everything that I could about this movie without delving into spoiler territory, so from this point on, this is your warning. The rest of the video, it is going to be a spoiler-focused discussion. Okay, so now jumping into the spoiler-focused stuff, I want to talk, first of all, about a point that I sort of brought up a little bit more, Rosalina. Rosalina, I do really wish was in this movie more. I do think that the opening sequence involving her, that sort of first action scene, was great, but I do wish that she was in this movie for a little bit more afterwards. Something that I honestly did enjoy about the last Super Mario movie was that they didn't make Peach a plot device, and they did make her a more active and involved character in the story. And I was kind of thinking that they were going to do something similar with Rosalina in this film, but unfortunately that didn't really end up being the case. She was the one who got captured this time, and therefore she did kind of have no other choice but to act as more of like a plot device than as a specific character. So Rosalina doesn't really go through like an arc really of any sort in this movie, and we don't get like a lot of screen time with her, which sucks for a movie that is based on Mario Galaxy, where she was of course one of the most importantly introduced main characters. I really do think that there was just something of a missed opportunity there, and if they were to have included Rosalina in the story and to not have her, captured, she could have, I think, been a lot more interesting of a character. And again, branching off on something that I was talking about before, when it comes to the split, storylines, that is something that I think could have worked a lot more than it did, because I just think that everything basically gets resolved a little bit too quickly and too easily. The characters, they do spend the first part of the movie, away from each other, but about, halfway through the film and going into the final act, all of the characters come back together again for that final sequence, and there isn't, a really interesting dynamic of, the characters have to, find and rescue one of the other characters. They just basically show up at the same location at the same time, and then it's just, boom, it's accepted the characters are back together again, and that's that. So that was something that I wish, could have been sort of expanded upon a little bit more, that they would have put a little bit more thought and care into that idea, of if the characters are going to be separated, how are we going to deal with them, coming back together again, and all of that, type of thing. And when it comes to the individual character arcs, I do think that some of the characters in this movie are definitely not designed equally. Some characters who we got to see, quite a bit of in the last film are not very present at all in this movie. Namely, the Donkey Kong characters, they don't really return. And the other character that I think was really kind of shafted in this movie is Toad. Toad didn't have nearly as much to do in this movie as he did in the first one, which is, I guess, kind of like a running joke in this movie. It's that Yoshi's kind of, taking his place in the friend group, but I did kind of feel like, oh man, there isn't a better sort of role for Toad in this movie. But, that is really kind of a minor thing. More significant problems, I think, comes in terms of, what Mario's sort of, role is in this movie. Because for Mario, I guess the only thing that really sort of changes about his character throughout the course of the film is how much he trusts Bowser. So once he does sort of get over that, mistrust of Bowser, I don't think that he really progresses as a character as much as some of the other characters do in the film. Peach does, I think, have perhaps the most interesting story in this film. She goes from, in the last movie, not knowing who her family is and feeling kind of, awkward about that, not really knowing what her place is in the world, to discovering that she does actually have some family out there in this vast world, and the film is basically spent about her trying to, reunite with her. And when she does eventually find her, in the end of the film, and we find out that, it's Rosalina, that is something that I think is very satisfying and a strong sort of conclusion to Peach's story in this movie. However, the character who was surprisingly, I think, the best in this film was Bowser and Bowser Jr. Their dynamic was actually really cool. I like that Bowser sort of started off in this movie as being like a guy who's kind of trying to reform and change his ways. but it actually ends up being his son who sort of brings him back in the world of villainy towards the end. I love that they do give him like a little bit of a brief sort of conflict of interest though, where, you know, Bowser Jr. sees Mario and Luigi only as enemies, but Bowser kind of sees them as like his friends, at least for a little while, so he's kind of hesitant to, you know, take action against them to try to kill them, but ultimately he does end up going back to being his old self and resumes being a villain again. Honestly, I think it could have been interesting in this movie if they did have a bit of a different ending for Bowser and his story arc. Maybe if, you know, in the final moments of the movie, he manages to convince his son that, you know, maybe being bad actually isn't the way and that they, you know, need to, you know, go a different direction. That could have been a lot more of an interesting story for Bowser, but I do think that it is important for the future of the franchise for him to remain a villain, and I think that, you know, the creatives recognize that as well, and so that is ultimately why they have him just go back to being a bad guy again towards the end of the movie. But overall, it's nice to see that Bowser isn't exactly a total, you know, bad guy, and that there is a little bit of good in him. That is something that I think that they could definitely pull from more in future movies. The last thing that I really want to say in terms of, I guess, like spoiler discussion is that I don't really know where the film franchise is going to go next. Like, Mario Galaxy totally came out of left field when they announced that was going to be the subject for their follow-up film. It felt like they were maybe going too far too fast in terms of like the Mario canon. Like, there are so many other games that we could pull stuff from before we need to get to a Galaxy level movie. At the very end, there is a slight teaser for, you know, Daisy, so we do have confirmation that Daisy is more than likely going to be in the third film if they do end up making a third film, which seems, you know, very likely at this point. But otherwise, like, there's no clear direction of what is naturally going to come next. Are they going to focus on, like, the events from 3D World? Are they going to focus on the events from Mario Odyssey? I don't know. Maybe it will be something, you know, entirely different and original. I guess for now, we'll just have to wait and see. I do trust that the creatives behind this film franchise do have an idea of where they are heading with it. So for now, I think that we just have to continue to trust that they are making the right decisions here. But yeah, that sort of brings us to the end of my thoughts on the Mario Galaxy. Please let me know if you have seen this movie. Did you like it? What were some of your thoughts on the film? Was there something that you were, you know, maybe hoping to see that wasn't quite there? What do you think this film franchise will do next? If you have, you know, any ideas or answers to any of these questions, please let me know in the comments. I would love to, you know, have a bit of a discussion about, you know, what is possibly next for this franchise and just overall what were your thoughts on the film. Anyways, as always, I'm Just Juice and this is all just my opinion. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care.